Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 149th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast, and welcome to July. And this month's theme is all about lived experience, how it shapes policy, our perspectives, and improves the way we do things. And throughout the month, I've got some really exciting guests talking about different aspects of their lived experience, whether it's through research, conversations they have, and the work they're doing, and how it can apply to you and what you're doing. And don't forget, I really love to hear from you as listeners. So why not connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and or the Instagram podcast page. And the handles are at Diverse Minds UK. So why are we talking about lived experience and what does it even mean? Over the last decade, the term lived experience has become more widely used. You might have heard of it in terms of healthcare settings or social care settings, but it can also be used in academia and research, particularly in relation to health and social care, as well as new ways of looking to deliver things in the public sector. In the field of mental health in particular, it's really quite an embedded concept, and it builds on the work of survivor and service users, activists, and people who have experienced mental ill health, and it can also extend to clinical services. So I thought it would be good to explore the concepts that are often associated with lived experience and how they can be expanded in the workplace. Now, I think lived experience in the workplace would or should be about engaging a wider audience and range of perspectives to shape workplace practices, change things for the better, and take an intersectional approach. And the term lived experience provides a unique person-centered approach in terms of knowledge, which can help to present important information that's often missing, and in particular, insight in relation to that lived experience perspective. So it could be around mental ill health and recovery. It could be around particular disabilities. It could be around race equity. It could be around sexual violence and how to keep staff safe. It could be related to race and race equity. And of course, all the factors that mesh and mix in the middle, because as I always say, we don't just come packaged in one neat box. So in its essence, it's a form of knowledge. And this knowledge of lived experience is often overlooked, isn't it? Because we talk about degrees, qualifications, certificates, and of course we have experiences as we do those things, but this kind of lived experience perspective, and it can often be lived experiences that have been very difficult, very challenging, that are not in the mainstream. I think another example actually I missed might be around baby loss or miscarriage in the workplace, or when people come back to work, policies, procedures, conversations that happen or don't happen. So in the case of academia and research, and of course workplaces where identikit policies are seen as more valuable, it's really important to think of these lived experiences as having an equal footing. And linked to the term lived experience is the term co-production. And I've gotten this definition from involve.org.uk, really interesting website, particularly around co-production. And they talk about the fact that co-production is an approach to decision-making and service design rather than a specific method. So it all comes from this recognition that if organizations are to deliver successful services, and that goes back to this idea of health and social care, they must understand the needs of their users and engage them closely in the design and delivery of those services. So if we think about that in the workplace and we think about staff and we also think about customers, often customers have a much better experience, don't they, than staff. So it's extending that perspective. I know a lot of agencies and marketing agencies will use potential consumers for focus groups, but we're also thinking here about, well, what about staff in terms of policies, events, things that happen? That does go beyond staff surveys. And often we don't know people's lived experience because these are quite sensitive areas or areas that we don't get to talk about in the workplace. Anyway, and Involve go on to say that co-production rejects the traditional understanding of service users as dependents of public services and instead redefines the service/user relationship as one of codependency and collaboration. Just like users need the support from public services, so service providers need the insights and expertise of its users in order to make the right decisions and build effective services. In practice, it means that those who are affected by a service are not only consulted, but are are part of the conception, design, steering, and management of those services. And it is often essential to support the participants and professionals throughout the exercise to ensure they're able to contribute on an equal footing. And that could be through information, training, mentoring, etc. So there's a lot in there, isn't there? And of course, with services, can be thought of as slightly different. But if we think about workplaces and staff and their input and that whole idea of the conception, so a conception of an idea, of a policy, of the way things are done, of new systems being brought in, I think probably what you'd find is there are a lot less issues and challenges when those things are rolled out because it's had so much input. And if we go back to the thinking about lived experience, research is often conducted by people who have experience of mental ill health, disability, the things that I mentioned. And so that research and the questions asked are much more in depth and coming from a place of empathy than more traditional research methods in terms of, I'm going to ask you the question, I'm the expert. And what it's thought is that the findings then focus on enablers and being much more social model in terms of supporting people and empowering people from a lived experience perspective. So this really has the potential to let people thrive and not be done onto. And it's the same in the workplace. We don't want people to feel they are trapped in a web of really difficult, hard to navigate workplace policies, systems, ways that things are done. And if we talk to people from the outset and have these conversations and really listen and act upon them, we're going to get a much more cohesive and positive workplace. So in the case of mental health and lived experience, this can give people more agency and a wider choice as to how they would like treatment, what's going to work from them. It means that they're more than the label of any diagnosis they might have been given. And the term lived experience is a really important one, but we shouldn't just be fixated on the phrase. It's rather thinking about that broader concept to describe it. So we also need to focus on listening and taking people with lived experiences, make sure they play a meaningful role in shaping how workplaces function and develop. So let's think about some gaps that we currently see. And if you're a regular listener, you probably will have heard me talk about these over the other 148 episodes that have gone out. But one example would be return to work policies, and that sometimes they feel quite punitive, or they're not fit for purpose, or there's far too much paperwork involved if someone isn't feeling particularly well or they've had to be off for a period of time for various reasons. So policies that are punitive versus policies that are supportive. Medicalizing neurodivergence and sending people to occupational health as opposed to getting work needs assessments, workplace needs assessments, and putting those adjustments in place. Failing to understand that many long-term health conditions fluctuate, so things like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, they're going to fluctuate in their nature, and using, I cannot stand it, the Bradford Index, to look at when people are on sick leave, how that impacts them, how many days they have off, trigger warnings, and it just all becomes very complicated when it doesn't need to be. Having a one-size-fits-all for bereavement leave and funeral arrangements. Different cultures and communities will be doing that in very different ways. The imagery and language that is used in internal comms and how that can feel exclusive. And if we run those past people and things weren't done in such a quick fashion, drop of a hat fashion, I think they would be, much more likely to be correct. Spaces and inaccessible offices, things that aren't navigable by wheelchair for wheelchair users, not having a place for nursing mothers. And many of you might be thinking, well, people don't normally bring their babies to work, but there are lots of times where returning parents, in particular mothers, will need to express breast milk during the workday, having contemplation or prayer spaces, and the list goes on and on and on. And if you want more information on this, do check out episode 79, Why Creating Genuine Neurodiversity Support with Jeanette Beetham, and Universal Design, Why It's So Important, episode 119, and I give more ideas around that. And I really hope that you're enjoying the content of this podcast and you want to keep up to date. Then why not join my bi-monthly newsletter? When you join, you'll receive a free copy of my ebook, The Mentally Healthy Leading Manager. And the link is bit.ly/DMSYNR. And whether this is your first show or you're a regular listener, I'd really love it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast from. So, what can we do then? How can we use lived experience in the workplace? What could that look like? So, first off, really broad brushstroke and quite simple, there will be some kind of staff surveys. So, that gives you a sense of where you can maybe start to explore where certain people are, because you want to niche in and look at how people are impacted by certain policies, processes, and systems. And staff surveys, the questions are quite broad. Staff networks, if you have them, are also a good place to start. Talking to specific groups, connecting with them and using their knowledge in a systematic way, but you also have to acknowledge the input there. Encouraging managers in one-to-ones to ask staff, what matters most to you? Listen to what matters, and do check out episode 97, Listening to Support, and act on this. And I know many of you are probably listening to this and thinking, well, it's all very well that you're saying act on it, but that is much more easier said than done. So I appreciate that. And it's not always easy to change things, but it's more about being open to the experiences that your workforce are going to face and what you could do. And it might be that I'd like to have more one-to-ones. Could we have 2 in the week for half an hour, for example, because I need to talk about certain aspects or certain things? And that's something that you don't normally have to ask permission for and can do. And you can try and make time for that. I don't think it's a big ask. But I think it's also important, if we talk about managers, but to consider the overall mission of an organization. So to ask yourself the question, either at a team level, departmental level, organizational level, or in fact, all three, where are we on our staff journey? What is it that's going well? Who are the staff that really feel valued? Who are the staff that really feel seen and heard? And who are the staff that don't feel that way? So also within this, you want to think about readiness with the particular topic or issue that you are addressing. So if it's around baby loss or supporting mothers, fertility mechanisms, the whole spectrum of conception to birth and people coming back to work, is it around accessibility? Is it around just looking at the social model of disability and integrating that into your workplace? So this is really, really important, because if there's a lot of resistance and there isn't much readiness, you're going to really find it very hard to get people with various lived experiences to talk openly, because they probably won't trust, and they probably won't trust the fact that anything's going to be done, because that's been the history. What do you already know about who in the organization is the person or the people with lived experience, and how to integrate them into the project that you're doing, the work that you're doing, feedback that you want to get? What value do you want to see, or do you hope, when you engage various staff members with various lived experiences? What would be the ideal scenario? What would you like people with lived experience to do? And how are you also going to value their engagement? Because this is in addition to their day job. So how will you do that? And also, how can you avoid majority minority thinking? So, the organization's set up for a certain type of person, and I'm probably guessing it's not people with any kind of disability and the broad spectrum of disability. So it's not people who are non-disabled or people from a certain cultural background that are kind of saying, oh, let me do this onto you. But actually, we're all staff at this particular workplace. Some staff have a better time. Some staff clearly aren't having the experience I've had. How do we bring it up, create equity in the playing field? So how can you create and construct a shared narrative? Find out what does everyone care about most, to avoid this separated thinking and for people not to feel like they're done onto. So I don't know of an organization that maybe has thought about lived experiences and co-production in this way, unless, of course, they are in the health and social care sector. But lived experience is a term to show how we involve people with different lived experiences from different walks of life. The term is important, but it's not about being fixated on it. We want to think quite broadly about how we take this into account. It's about integrating these aspects into existing and new elements of the workplace, policies, practices, procedures, systems, etc. Think about how we create safe spaces to encourage employees to come forward and discuss their lived experience and create trust. Managers, of course, have a vital role to play and can do this in quite a light touch way in one-to-ones. And think about your readiness, where you want to focus your energy, and how it's all going to be done. And maybe think about a pilot area or project that could be useful to you. So don't forget, you can also check out my Mentally Healthy Professional course, my online course, which is all about helping you create the ideal work-life blend for you. And the link is diverseminds.thinkific.com/courses/the Mentally Healthy Professional. And please, what other topics would you like me to talk about? I'd really love to hear from you. So you can leave me an anonymous voice note on SpeakPipe, which is a voice note platform. And the link is in the show notes, but I'll give it to you now as well. It's bit.ly/SPKPDMP. I really look forward to hopefully you tuning into the next episode, where I'm going to be talking to people about different aspects of lived experience. And we kick off with Alan Reid, who talks about his lived experience of mental ill health, being queer and growing up in the west of Scotland. So I really hope you can join us. And until the next episode, take care.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.